You're listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
You have my sword.
And you have my bow.
And my trowel.
Hello, you're listening to episode 35 of And My Trowel, where we look at the fantastic side of archaeology and the archaeological side of fantasy. I'm Tilly.
And I'm Ash.
And today, we've been given a very interesting quest.
Ooh, tell me more.
So, are you familiar with Atlantis?
You mean that massive civilization that sank beneath the waves and now has created an amazing basis for even a bigger mermaid civilization? Yes, I'm quite familiar.
Yes, that's the one. But maybe you're less familiar with Sitnalta.
Sitnalta. That does sound vaguely familiar.
You might recognize it from the name of a paper that was published last year by Dr Otalp.
Oh yeah. That was the study that proposed that there was actually an ancient landscape, even older, right, than Atlantis, that used to connect Atlantis with the rest of the continent. But then that sank, 10,000 years ago beneath the waves?
Yeah, exactly. So Dr. Otalp actually contacted me this week, which was very exciting. And he's putting together a research team to further investigate his claim, and he would like us to help out with the project proposal.
Okay, that's amazing. Very exciting indeed. I can't wait to get that on our CV.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's what I thought.
So we're writing a proposal for the project that would investigate an ancient underwater landscape.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, okay, so I know we usually start with a literature review, but actually what would make this really interesting this time is to see other similar projects that have been undertaken.
True.
You know,
yeah.
So maybe you learn from our peers and colleagues to see what the best way to develop our research methods would be.
It's funny you should mention that, Ash, because I'd like you to meet Dr. Sasja van de Vaart-Verschoof, which I think every time I say it differently, but hey, otherwise known as the overdressed archaeologist, who is an archaeologist, curator, editor, and so many more things that I don't have the time to list here because it would be a podcast episode all in itself. But most of all, she's been very heavily involved in the Doggerland project.
Oh my goodness. Hello. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello. Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, so I'm definitely very interested to hear more about Doggerland.
I thought you would be.
Yeah, I am. But first, we want to get to know you. So what is your archaeological specialism and how did you get into it?
So my archaeological specialism is actually on primarily the Middle Ages in Northwestern Europe. So I wrote my PhD on a series of really, really rich and fantastical Iron Age elite burials with...
Oh, fab.
Yeah, so it's all these guys who were buried with fabulous swords and horse tack for wagons that were completely decorated with bronze and just sort of amazing.
Sounds very cool.
So that was my PhD, and I've sort of broadened my interest into lots of different things. And one of the things I indeed work on now also is Doggerland.
So, I mean, you mentioned you did that for your PhD research, but since then, and yeah, I kind of alluded to it in your introduction, you're a woman of many talents, many different areas, many different tasks. So what kinds of other things have you been working on since you graduated with a degree in archaeology? Okay,
so since I finished my PhD in 2017, and after that, I started working as a freelancer, just to sort of, initially it started just a way to make ends meet until I thought I was going to do a postdoc, but that never really materialized into anything, which actually worked out really well because it turned out I loved being a freelancer because you get to do really diverse things and use all the skills you have available. So I use the fact that I'm a native speaker, English and Dutch, because I have an American mom and had a Dutch dad, to do a lot of editing and translating, which people need all the time. I did a lot of graphic design work for Sidestone Press, where they taught me how to make books. And then I used my social media skills to sort of help them with their marketing strategy. And so that sort of just all the skills and interests I had sort of wielded for archaeology and basically affording the bills.
Which is useful.
Which is very useful. Yes, we like this. Then I also have a background in museum work, starting during my degree with some internships. And so in the last couple of years, I've been curator of archaeology at the Drents Museum as well as assistant curator of prehistory at the National Museum of Antiquities for a couple of years. So I also do a lot of exhibition work and design. So it's very diverse. It's true. I forget half the things I do.
I mean, I wasn't joking. Honestly, I started writing the list and was like, I don't have time for this. Like, I'm just going to put some bullet points and we'll get to this later.
Yeah, no, honestly, so one of my contracts at the museum ended about a month ago. So I had to update my resume. And even I lost track of what I was doing. So
we call that transferable skills.
Exactly. Yes.
Well, and I have a slightly random question because so you did a PhD, as you mentioned, in these elite burials, which, by the way, if anyone wants to hear more about that, there's another show on the APN.
Stop plugging your own show.
Travel. I know. It's because I keep stealing the guests from all my different shows and just like using them all the time. So yes. Anyway, Sasja talks all about her PhD research in that. So if you're interested in hearing more, do come along and hear about that.
It's a very good episode.
It's a fun one. It's a good fun one. But so you did your PhD, but would you say, because like you say, you did the PhD with a view to sort of continuing in academia and continuing that, to climb that ladder, which indeed for that you need a PhD, right? Like to sort of start and go. But would you say you needed to have done a PhD in order to have gotten a lot of the jobs that you get now? Like, would you say it's something that has been very beneficial to your future, the freelancing work that you're doing?
I would say it might not be required, but it certainly helps, primarily because the PhD research had me traveling to a lot of different museums and a lot of different depots and working with scholars from different universities, both in the Netherlands and abroad. So my network got really big. So that leads to a lot of people going, oh, I wish I had somebody to translate this book for me. And then me being around going, hello, I can do that for you. So there's that. And because I specialize, I do pretty much all kinds of archaeological translating, but I specialize in particularly in academic archaeological texts. And the fact that I have a doctorate sort of boosts the confidence of the clients that, for example, I recently helped someone with their grant application, sort of rewriting it and correcting it. And the fact that I have a doctorate and experience writing grant proposals and getting grants means they feel more confident that I know what I'm talking about.
Right. Yeah, fair enough.
And the same for like the curator jobs. Having a doctorate is not required, but it certainly helps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. No, because I've had a lot of people ask me, like, is it worth doing a PhD? And so I'm always curious to hear what other people who are not in academia but have done a PhD think about that. Like,
even aside from what it means for your future, I think doing my doctorate was both the hardest and the funnest thing. One of the funnest things I've ever done, because you get to go nuts on something you're really, really interested in for years. So not to minimize how hard and stressful it is, but I really enjoyed doing my doctorate.
Yeah.
So you've mentioned you do, translations and things like that too. But what is your most exciting job? The one that you find that you enjoy the most out of all the jobs you do?
Probably being a curator. I'm really I love, first of all, just the materiality of artifacts. I love,
you're in the right place.
A reason we're friends, Matilda, and collaborate on things. So I love sort of the luxury of having the key to the depot and just going to, getting to go inside and ogle all the swords and study all the things. I love that. And I really, really enjoy sort of the challenge of connecting archaeological science to the public. So there's a lot of great scientists in archaeology. Not all of them are very good, have the same level of ability when it comes to translating that to the general public.
Oh yeah, it's definitely a skill that.
Yeah, and I really enjoy that a lot. So, and making exhibitions is just so cool. I mean, we just opened one on the Bronze Age.
I've seen that. That looks so cool.
And you can just I walked around when it was just before it opened going, I touched that, I touched that, I touched that. I got told that. And it's like bragging rights to my archaeology friends. Like, I touched that golden necklace over there. Aren't you jealous? And it's just amazing. I love it.
That's fantastic. I love that. So there is something nice about having the key, to all of it. And you're like, it's mine, really.
Yeah, no,
it's my treasure trove.
Yeah, plus every time, even with it, I'm not a field archaeologist, for example, but even within the depots, I end up making discoveries, things that just have sort of been forgotten or not recognized at the time that we bought it as what it was. So every time I go through the collections, I find quote unquote new things, new insights, new materials. So there's also a lot of that sort of treasure hunter aspect to it.
So they do exist in archaeology, but
They
just
do exist.
in a very
Just we wear
controlled
gloves and
environment.
we're very delicate and controlled environments. Exactly.
It's because someone's bought something at one point or brought something in, and then there's not enough records, and then you're like, what is this? Wait, who did that belong to? Why is that labeled here? And you're like,
Yeah.
We'll just put it in a box, it's fine.
It's like just
Also
been in that
things-
box for 50 years, and you're like, what?
Exactly. Well, I mean, for example, the National Museum of Antiquities has been around for 200 years.
Yeah.
So a lot of things that were bought or brought into the collection, over 100 years ago, archaeology wasn't that advanced yet. So they just log it as bronze artifact, probably prehistoric. And now you look at it and then you're like, actually, that is a key component of a Middle Iron Age chariot.
Very cool.
So, yeah.
Also, you have the other way. I just remember at some point during my PhD, and I was looking at museum collections, and I was looking up awls to do microwear analysis on them. And so I had asked the curator, the lovely lady working at the Cambridge Museum of Anthropology and Archaeology, if she could pull up like all of the objects that had been labeled as awl, so that I could have a look at them and analyze them. And like hardly any of them I would say were an actual awl. Like they were basically just pointed things, and then someone had obviously looked at them in the 1950s and been like, yeah, that's an awl, that's fine, like, and just shoved it in the box. And it was like
I do always wonder, as a field archaeologist, right, that if we get something wrong on that bag on the site, does that just continue on over and over and over again?
I don't
and
think
like perpetuated.
so,
I don't know. Sometimes.
well, maybe, but like also at like our company, I'm involved with like the fines officer, cataloging and everything. And I mean, even me, I'll be looking at it in like one stage of the process, and I'll be like, I think that might be this, but maybe it's this. I'll just label it as this for now, and I'm going to have to look at it again in like a month when it's thing, and then it'll be fresh in my mind, and it's fine. Maybe I'll think of something else then. Like that's a future me problem.
To be fair, I've had a few bags in Post-Ex where it's like, this is a pottery shard decorated, and I'm like, what? And then you open it and it just crumbles, and you're like, that was mud. That was a boot print. That's what that was.
But
not ideal.
Well, so we've established you are a woman of many talents, many pies and many fingers. But one very important question that we have for you for this particular podcast: do you enjoy reading, and more specifically, do you enjoy reading fantasy?
I do enjoy reading, and I wouldn't say I'm a well-versed fantasy reader, but I do have a number of theories and books in the genre that I love.
Okay, that's good. That's fine.
That's okay.
enough.
And that will change, because now you'll be on this podcast, and then you'll love fantasy, and then all the books we recommend, you'll absolutely read.
Yeah, true to some extent, except that I personally struggle to read new books for fun. I find I generally prefer to either read really long series where you've gotten to know the characters in one book and then can just sort of stay with them, or rereading books a lot.
Yeah.
Is that like a comfort thing, rereading?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
It is. Yeah. So it's like, personally, when I'm meeting new people, it takes energy and effort to get to know someone. And then that's so true. And
same with the book.
Whereas meeting up with friends that you've known for years is much less effort mentally and emotionally. And I, of course, read and write a ton for my work. I don't want to have to think too hard when I'm reading for fun and leisure. So I'm a big book rereader.
To be fair, I really like rereading books as well. Yeah. I quite often did that. It's only actually because of the Archaeo Book Club, which Ash and I are also a part of, that has sort of forced me to read new books, and that's almost why one of the other reasons I started it was just to give myself accountability to like trying and reading books. But I'm the same. I definitely love, especially audiobooks. I definitely re-listen to a lot of audiobooks.
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting. See, I chase dopamine, so I need new things all the time.
Fair.
Oh, yeah.
Constant. Like, I will be downloading books upon books, and I'll be like, right, this one is what I feel right now. I will read this. And I will follow the dopamine trail.
So yeah, I have so many books on my TBR. And when you read it, then you're like, oh yeah, this is great. Oh my God, this is amazing. Why didn't I start this earlier?
Yeah.
But I understand what you mean, Sasha. It's that first push to be like, it's like like when you're going out and you're like, oh, I know I'm going to have fun when I'm there. But like now I have to like get dressed and have a shower and like leave the house and like it's that whole thing. So
Plus my leisure read. I mean, when I'm on holiday, I like to read new things because I actually sit and read as an activity. Yeah. But most days it's just like before you fall asleep, a little reading to relax. And then it's just too much effort to read a new book.
Fair, yeah. Which actually is probably also why I re-listen to audiobooks, because I also quite often listen to them before I fall asleep, and then I fall asleep and I miss like half an hour of the book. So if it's a new one, then I'm screwed because I have no idea what happened. But if it's one I know, then I can listen in again the next day and I'm like, oh yeah, this bit, yeah, cool, nice.
If you're rereading the Amelia Peabody series, like or listening to it, how are you listening to it? Because the narrator is so bombastic, like she's like so loud,
so great. It's like, oh my goodness, yeah. No, well, there's some audiobooks that you can't listen to before bed, indeed. No, they're just a bit too intense. But
and Sasja, do you have a favorite fantasy book or a favorite series that you have read that you would go back to maybe as a fantasy book?
Let's see if you. I'm not sure you can call it. Can you call it fantasy? The Diana Gabaldon
yes,
books?
Absolutely.
Yeah, definitely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I have read those until they fall apart.
Sing me a song.
Yeah. Although the series, the TV series is or the Netflix series is okay, but they're not the book. No, I love rereading the books.
Still haven't read that one.
Oh my god!
I know. I want to, but
if you want to save our friendship and keep asking me to appear on random podcasts, I have to read.
That's emotional blackmail. Possibly, that's fine.
So you try and convince everyone to read Terry Pratchett every single episode.
I'm not saying that like it's a bad series. I'm not saying I don't want to read it. I definitely want to read it. It's just there's a lot of other things I want to read too. And
they are chunky. They're chunky books.
There's just so many of them. This is why I'm worried that I'll start reading it and then I'll just have to buy like 20 more books because I won't. I don't know how many are in the series, but yeah.
My partner, he is from the Isle of Skye and he has Gaelic and he read them when he was younger and he actually really liked the Gaelic translation. Yes. So there you go. Very, very impressed with that. Even though they weren't entirely correct, he was impressed with her knowledge of Gaelic.
Oh, nice.
There you go. So they're factually correct as well. Time travel also exists. Well, exactly. All this talking has made me a little bit thirsty. So I might just pop the cauldron on and make some tea and we will be right back.
It's 2025, a new year, and the perfect time to turn your business dreams into reality. Maybe you've been tossing around a great idea, but haven't acted yet. Well, Shopify is how you're going to make it happen. Shopify makes it simple to create your brand, open for business, and make your first sale. With thousands of customizable templates, you don't need coding or design skills. Just drag, drop, and go. Plus, Shopify's social media tools help you connect all your channels and create shoppable posts so you can sell everywhere your customers scroll. Managing your business is easy too. From shipping to taxes to payments, Shopify handles the details on a single dashboard, letting you focus on what really matters: growing your business. Established in 2025 has a nice ring to it.
Thanks for the cuppa, Tilly.
You're welcome.
So now that we've got Sasja here, maybe we can start with the literature review and pull together our existing knowledge to get an initial idea of what we might be dealing with. So, which fantasy books have you guys read that or feature underwater landscapes / civilizations? Because I have a rec.
Oh yeah, go. Start us off.
Okay, so mine's actually a romantasy because
of course.
I mean, there's no podcast without me talking about romance. So Emma Hamm does a series called, it starts with The Whispers of the Deep and then it goes into The Song of the Abyss and then there's another one. And it's essentially an underwater human civilization, very kind of steampunk-esque, where they're all welders and they live in this kind of like domed shape, like underground city, and the humans have basically wrecked the world above, so they have to live under the sea.
Classic.
And there's an opposite tribe of undines, which are basically mermaids, but they're kind of the Irish undines. And so the love stories between humans and mermaids, and merman.
How does that work in terms of like
I don't think you want to finish that question.
No. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like breathing, because like people can't breathe underwater. So like, how does that work with the relationship between them? Because surely also a mermaid can't breathe out of water, or can they? Oh, true, they can. They can sit up on rocks and go, part of your world. So yeah, that must be fun.
That was brilliant. Thank you. So the underwater stuff, they have air pumps and things like that. So the first book, she's an engineer and a welder. So she has to make sure that like all the locks are sealed, that everything's airtight, and they're able to kind of, and it's like a military base. It seems like there's like a few different cities underneath the sea, and the humans have encroached on the underwater world and of the Undines. And then they have like little rebreathers almost. And if you've ever worn a rebreather, that's not exactly, it's a sci-fi rebreather, because they're absolutely awful rebreathers. Horrible. I would never ever do any of that underwater training again. Nope. Horrible. When you're circulating your own air, nah.
Oh, I guess.
So you're like, it's fine. I love being underwater. I'm like, I don't.
Underwater. To be fair, I only used one once, and it was for a very short period, and it was in a pool. So
yeah, I did helicopter training. So you had to get in and out of the helicopter.
That's just terrifying. That idea.
It was horrifying. I think I've been triggered and traumatized by it, even though it wasn't real. Because
they basically just crash the helicopter into the water, right? And then you have to get out.
You have to get out. Yeah, and you have to wait.
No, that's like a horror film waiting to happen.
It was awful, and I also was really rubbish. So you get different hats.
Pull the helicopter out again. Ash isn't going out.
No, seriously. So they were like, I told the guy at the beginning, like, I am claustrophobic. I do not like to be in like small spaces. And he was like, you'll be fine. And he just like told us that basically. Yeah, and the instructor had just told us basically that 3 out of 4 you will die in this scenario, so don't worry about it. But I was like, okay, that's not comforting at all.
How is that supposed to be it'll be fine? Those two sentences don't go together. It'll be fine. 3 out of 4 of you will die.
Yeah. So there was like 4 archaeologists. The other 3 of my colleagues were extremely brave. I was not. I cried and had a panic attack. While everyone else was a marine or an oil rig worker, so they had done it like several times beforehand. But essentially, I got demoted because I can swim, but because I floated to the top and got stuck because I didn't react quickly enough, he was like, I'm going to give you the red hat, and that means you're not allowed to swim in the pool. I have to drag you around. So I was just being dragged around by this really built man.
Ooh, no.
It was
I think I see what happened here, Ash. I think I see what happened here. Oh no, I'm so bad at this. Oh, not the red hat. Oh,
I feel like you're undervaluing my trauma right now, Tilly.
You just said a built man dragged you around in a pool.
I was about to say, the emphasis was not on the healthiest.
But I did look like a gnome. I looked like a gnome. I had a horrible
dying in an underwater scenario. You wanted to look like a gnome.
Yeah, and also the suits didn't fit women. This is a total tangent, but they didn't fit women, so it meant they carried more air. So immediately you would just rise to the top if you didn't get out of the helicopter. Needless to say, it was a very traumatizing experience. And anyway, the book.
Okay, but so maybe we need to. We'll come back to this later. But like maybe we need to work out a system which doesn't require actual underwater archaeology, like diving, in order to do this project. So we'll come back to that afterwards.
Yeah. Yeah. But they are able to breathe once in the book. They kind of accept the bond with the Undine as well. So it's all magical and sci-fi.
Okay. That reminds me a little bit of one, which I haven't actually read, but it was a book for another book club I'm in, called To Kill a Kingdom by Alexandra Christo. And it's basically about sirens, like the siren princess. And they have to get the heart of a prince and like basically kill him in order to, it's a bit dark. And that's sort of how they can become queen and do all this stuff. But like I say, I haven't read it. So, but yeah, that was all about the kind of mermaid kingdom or the siren kingdoms under the water, which I feel indeed is most underwater. So that's why I'm curious that you mentioned this book that has like an actual human civilization living on the bottom of the seabed.
Yeah, the civilization's quite interesting, but it's sort of, I wish she'd sort of kind of got into it a bit more, and I haven't read the second book, so I'm hoping that this one will, because the first book, it just took the human out of the civilization and popped her into kind of an isolated story with the Undine. So it would be good to know more about the civilization. But they do live in domed kind of steampunk-esque. Think of
Very
like
cool.
1920s.
Almost like Maas type things.
Yeah. It's kind of like a Art Nouveau cover and everything like that. So that's what it's meant to look like. Very cool.
Random side tangent. I saw a really cool meme today that was talking about the difference between Art Deco and Art Nouveau. And I can't remember now which way round it is. But Art Deco, it's like one of them, it's as if it was designed by elves, and one of them, it's as if it was designed by dwarves.
Yep. Art Deco is dwarves. Art Nouveau is
elves. See, the problem, and I was thinking that's such a great way of doing it, but then of course I can't remember which way around it is, so it's not a very great way of doing it. Anyway,
No,
sorry,
but
that was a
Sasha's
really.
told you now.
I know. When I've literally just forgotten again. Art Nouveau is elves.
You can remember Deco and dwarves. They both start with D.
There we go. That's great. Oh, fantastic. See, this is why you do what you do, Sasha. Woman of many talents, like I say. Which do you know of any books that feature kind of underwater landscapes or civilizations or anything like that, Sasha?
I know some. Obviously, I read my 8-year-old daughter the Little Mermaid book.
Oh, right.
Oh, nice.
Another one I was thinking of is the Crescent series. What is it called? Crescent City series by Sarah Maas.
Sarah J. Maas, yeah.
And I have a talent for reading books, really liking them, and then promptly forgetting everything about them. But in these books, there's a number of different kinds of magical creatures. Like there's fae, there's vampires, and I think they actually just call them mer people. I don't think they have a fancy name, but they live primarily under the water, both in rivers and oceans. Like there's different tribes of them, I think. And I believe they have to like shift form in order to either breathe underwater or above the water and be. Okay. I think they look pretty much human out of the water. I think they shift into a human-ish.
More like a selkie.
More like a silk. Although
I love selkies.
But silkies turn into seals, right?
They shed seal skin, yeah.
So it's kind of like that.
Okay.
And the Crescent City series, they're connected to Akatar, aren't they? They're all interconnected.
Yeah, vaguely.
Yeah.
Akatar being, that's the
Court of Thorns and Roses. So you have to kind of read that in order to know Crescent City.
This is what I've heard about the Sarah J. Maas ones, that like you can't just really dive in anywhere. You have to like actually read all of them. Is that the case? Or
I don't think so. Okay. I mean, they are interconnected. Like I think in the Crescent series book,
Spoilers.
At some point, I think like in the last book, at some point she does something. Travels through another world, and if you read the Akatar books, you recognize it as being the Akatar world.
Ah, okay.
So they're connected, but you can't. You can read the Sarah J. Maas series independently. Like I don't think you have to read Akatar in order to read Crescent City. But if you have read them all, you sort of recognize the different worlds being connected in a sense.
Speaking of a series that you don't necessarily have to read in order, but if you have, you'll be able to recognize different sections of it.
Did you just lead us into that?
Maybe. Hey, I had nothing to do with Sasha picking Sarah J. Maas. That was fate. But this one actually is a really good reference, because in Jingo, Terry Pratchett's Discworld book, you've got an island called the Island of Leshp, which rises from the sea and comes to the surface and then basically causes a war like between two different city-states. And but fun little extra side fact. So when I was just looking this up, because I was checking to see if there was any, extra information or anything. So that book, like in that story, so this island like rising to the surface is actually based on a real island, like in our world or in, Earth, called Graham Island or Isola Ferdinandia, which is an island near Sicily. And it rises to the surface during volcanic activity and then sinks back below again. And it's happened 4 times since 300 BC. So the last recorded time was in July 1831, but then by January 1832, it had gone again. So like,
wow,
it's so cool, right? Like, so these, fantasy is real, these whole things. But anyway. So,
speaking of fantasy, I think you're forgetting one of the major key players in fantasy.
That's true. Now that you say it.
You're thinking, Numenor.
Numenor, of course.
Numenor, Lord of the Rings.
Which, actually, also interestingly enough, when I was looking up stuff about Atlantis, I found a random reference which Tolkien used to refer to Numenor in his letters as Atlantis Numenor. So like there's no question that he wasn't using it as an analogy like for Numenor, which, I think.
It's interesting how much he revised as well.
Yeah.
I'm currently reading Beren and Luthien.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
And unreal how much he revises stuff and changes them. And that's why they have just several names. And like even he doesn't know, which is like the whole part of like the mythology. And like Christopher Tolkien, his son, he's like, I don't know what Dad wanted, but I'm going to call it this. like he calls Beren, who is a man, a gnome. But he's not a gnome as we would know it. But that
maybe he just failed the helicopter training and had to put it on.
You're so funny. My trauma is laughable to you. You get your comedic timing from me.
Right, I got it. I'm going to go now. Have fun for the rest of the podcast.
Yeah, I'll see that. But no, gnome is a type of elf. So Beren was originally an elf. And then he means just like he's very wise.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
He was like, I'll change this later, and then never got around to it.
And then somebody just keeps referring to him a gnome, and it really changes the whole dynamic of the love story.
That sounds like one of your love stories, the romantasy ones. Like
I've never read a gnome one, actually. Maybe I should.
Hey, there'll be one out there. Well, and actually the name of Numenor following destruction was also Atalante, apparently. So, yet again, another, which indeed we haven't talked about the most famous story about an underwater civilization, which is, of course, the myth of Atlantis, which is a myth in some worlds and is reality in other worlds, of course. So yes, interestingly enough, myth of Atlantis, first mentioned by Plato around 360 BC. And it was actually mentioned in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, where it's referred to as a huge island to the west of the Strait of Gibraltar. So that's basically just off like the western edge of the current Mediterranean. And it existed for it existed 9,000 years before Plato's time, according to like these dialogues. So this is like everyone who's sort of like, yes, Plato's writing about a current city. It's like, no. He's writing about something that apparently happened 9,000 years before. So it would be like us writing about, I don't know, an early Neolithic like settlement or something.
So it's not really like primary source.
It's not exactly primary source. That's a good way to put it. So yes, but anyway, and most people probably know the tale. It's a great civilization, but then it became morally corrupt. It tried to do too many things. One of them was attacking the city-state of Athens, and so the gods decided to punish them and sunk them beneath the sea. Which, if anyone, by the way, talking about other shows on the Archaeology Podcast Network, if anyone wants to hear more about Atlantis, there's a really great episode of the Pseudo-Archaeology Podcast that talks all about it, Dr. Andrew Kinkella. So do go and check that out. And also, there's a whole episode of You're Dead to Me, which looks at it and looks at the history, but also like the problematic politics that surround the whole Atlantis kind of mythology, like, the racism and all of that kind of stuff. So definitely.
The one thing when Atlantis always pops into my head is obviously the film.
Yes.
Atlantis.
The animated film.
The animated film. Is it DreamWorks?
DreamWorks,
yeah. And so that always pops into my head. But also, doesn't Lara Croft go to Atlantis?
Does she at some point? Oh, I don't know about that one.
I'm sure she does. Or there's like, that's like the crest of civilization, the mother culture. Is it like Atlantis in the Lara Croft lore? And then there's like rulers. There's like 3 rulers of Atlantis. Like centuries and centuries ago. I'm sure that's one of the yeah, as long as, cool. With the Knights Templar, because obviously they were there too.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the Knights Templar go everywhere. And then the Illuminati and, all of that.
Yeah. So,
but, yeah. And, obviously you also have the Marvel films with Aquaman, who's basically the king of Atlantis, which, speaking of well-built men who can definitely drag me through the water anytime they want, Jason Momoa.
I can tell you Gary didn't look like that. Gary from the helicopter training did not look like that.
Which may be a good thing, because you don't really want to meet Jason Momoa wearing a gnome hat.
Wearing a gnome hat, yeah.
And also, I got choked out by one of my colleagues because we had to get into a raft as well.
Oh,
and she kept pulling on my really big suit. And so I couldn't get into the raft. And I was like, why am I slowly suffocating? And it was because of her. She was panicking. She also had a gnome hat. So there you go.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, it was just a great time.
No murders in the boat.
The gnome murders of Clydebank.
The gnome murders. It sounds like a book that I would read. It sounds great, cozy fantasy. Like,
with a romance in it, obviously.
Yeah.
It's going to be set on Atlantis. Brilliant.
Yes.
Look at that.
Perfect. Excellent.
Tilly.
Yeah.
Do you see, speaking of water, do you see the water flowing up the street? Does that concern you?
Oh, no. Okay. Maybe we need to do like a quick sacrifice to make sure that the gods realize that we're not trying to like rebuild Atlantis. We're just trying to like research it.
Okay. That's a good idea. I'll go and grab the sacrificial roast chicken out of the icebox. Don't worry, Sasha, you're off the hook.
Okay. Perfect. So, well, in that case, I'm very sorry, listeners. We need to cut short this episode of And My Trowel. But don't worry, we will be continuing next episode with part 2 of our discussion with Sasha. In the meantime, as always, if you have any suggestions for podcast episode ideas, do feel free to get in touch with us. Also, if you want to find out more about anything that we've spoken about in today's episode, you can find all contact information as well as links to further reading in the show notes.
The Archaeology Podcast Network is 10 years old this year. Our executive producer is Ashley Airy, our social media coordinator is Matilda Siebrecht, and our chief editor is Rachel Roden. The Archaeology Podcast Network was co-founded by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle in 2014 and is part of Cultural Media and DigTech LLC.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archpodnet.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.